So I'm Tristan Caulfield, this is Ingolf Becker, and we're here to present work that we've done jointly with our colleagues at NICT in Japan. This is the team. There's actually quite a few of us here today, so feel free to come up and chat about the work later on if you want. So, yeah, the Internet of Things, it's basically growing very rapidly, becoming increasingly adopted. And IoT provides many benefits to consumers and businesses, but as we all know, unsecured IoT devices can pose risks to individuals and networks, and securing IoT is a challenge. Many stakeholders have roles to play in securing IoT, and in this work, we're focusing on two of these stakeholders, ISPs and individuals, and we're looking in particular at these stakeholders in Japan. And we're going to be looking at their attitudes, barriers, and incentives. So ISPs play a particularly interesting role, right? They're kind of uniquely situated in the ecosystem. They have the ability to sort of observe traffic, and they can detect when there are compromised devices on their networks, and then they can act to either notify their customers, or where it's allowed, they can basically take actions like implementing walled gardens, which can be used to quarantine these sort of devices and block them from accessing the rest of the network. ISPs can also have a role before compromise, so it's possible for them to potentially scan for vulnerable IoT devices and isolate them or notify their consumers before they become compromised. Another option is that government agencies or outside agencies basically can scan for vulnerable or compromised devices and then ask the ISP to notify the device owners to take actions to remediate. And so for a bit of context, there's an ongoing project that does exactly this in Japan. It's called the Notice Project. And essentially, it's a nationwide project to identify and remediate the vulnerable and infected devices. And the NICT essentially scans for these devices, and then participating ISPs are informed and then assume the responsibility of identifying and notifying their customers who own these devices. So the study. So as I said, we're looking at two different stakeholders, the ISPs and the individuals, and we're asking sort of three top-level research questions. So we're asking what the essentially the attitudes of ISPs and individuals are towards the security and privacy of IoT. And by attitudes, we kind of mean their concerns, their perceptions, their commitment to securing IoT, and also what their views are of other stakeholders in the ecosystem. And we also ask what the barriers are that prevent these stakeholders from keeping IoT secure. And we look at sort of internal barriers as well as external barriers. And we also look at the incentives that are, possibly exist to encourage the ISPs and individuals to secure IoT. So some of this is focused on the Notice Project in particular, but a lot of it is very much about sort of the general attitudes, barriers, and incentives as well. So, yes, we had quite a kind of a detailed program of research for this. We had a kind of a series of questionnaires, workshops, interviews, and surveys to essentially talk to and learn about both the ISPs and the users. And, kind of a prior or, early studies kind of informed the later studies and helped the design of those. The details of all the studies and different workshops and things like that are in the paper. And obviously, having so many kind of detailed studies gave us a lot of kind of interesting results. We can't talk about all of these now, but I'm going to pass you over to Ingolf now, who's going to discuss some of them.
Well, thank you, Tristan. Good afternoon, everyone. Our results are split into three groups. First, I will go through the internet service providers and their views on IoT security. So in our sample here, the ISPs are particularly felt particularly responsible for notification and detection of IoT devices, and they felt that this is the area where they can commit more resources to. They felt they were well placed to do this, not so much on prevention or recovery aspects, but very much on the notification part. Now, ISP's primary business objective is not security of IoT devices, it's providing internet, so they're most concerned about service disruptions and service continuity. We asked the ISPs about what can be done to improve IoT security, and they came up with a number of differing topics. Internally, for the ISPs, especially small ISPs, staffing was an issue. This was not a problem for larger ISPs. They thought that executive buy-ins, selling this to higher ups, that IoT security should be on the agenda, was a barrier. Externally, from the ISPs, they felt that individuals are fairly careless with their devices, but even if they try to be better or to secure their devices, they are often unable to do so. So they had this notion that IoT device makers shouldn't probably build insecure devices, or at least provide guidance to securing them if necessary. When it came to notifying individuals and their customers about compromised devices, there were a number of challenges. Firstly, they received IP addresses, and now in Japan and in many other countries, residential IP addresses are dynamic and change every 24 hours or so. So actually matching the IP addresses they received to customers was difficult. And if they did manage to match them, the follow-up contact establishment was hard, because details might not be up to date, or the account holder is not actually the one that owns the device or runs the network. So getting to the person that can actually fix devices was difficult. So in terms of solutions, the ISP suggested better tech to detect and remediate problems, better devices manufactured for IoT. They also felt like regulatory changes might be useful to allow them to restrict more traffic. And they wished for better awareness so that those users that received an email from the ISP about a compromised device would actually be able to act on it and fix the device, rather than just ignoring the email. Now, flipping it around and looking at the individuals, well, we are fairly pleased that our sample is somewhat realistic, and in our opinion, and our users were mostly not concerned about IoT security. They had very average security behaviors. They were uncertain about the likelihood and impact of compromises of IoT devices. We asked them what they would do if they had to remediate a compromised device, and, well, the majority of them didn't know where to start or what to do. Some suggested that it might be easier to replace the device, or that fixing is not worth the time or stress. Although a quarter of participants did actually try to fix things, and of these, well, only a small fraction managed to do so without problems. In terms of what they felt could improve the situation, maybe they thought that experiencing negative consequences of attacks might help them understand the problem better and act more so, so getting burned once might help them from getting burned twice. But they didn't really feel that any other party, any other stakeholder was particularly responsible for securing the IoT. Later on in the survey and interviews, we put the ISP initiative, the Notice project, to them, and about half of them actually supported the notion of being notified, and half of them also thought that notifying and blocking suspicious traffic would be suitable. Now, we've heard already quite a lot about willingness to pay for IoT security, and well, while we have some numbers in the papers, but they're self-reported and should really be taken with some grain of salt, at least a large number of participants were notionally willing to pay for additional IoT security services. Now, stepping a little bit back from the topic, keeping IoT secure is not the priority for ISPs or individuals. They all have other things to do, be productive, right? But it takes a lot of stakeholders that need to work together, and we feel like the Notice project encouraged this collaboration and is actually potentially something that should be maybe taken up in other countries. We believe that an effective government is at heart of solutions here. Many of the barriers and incentives that we encountered were external to the parties, so somebody that breaks down these barriers to effective collaboration is required. Perhaps a change in the law to allow ISPs to lawfully monitor and block traffic might be required, but of course that is a hot topic for privacy reasons and other reasons, so this needs to be done carefully. Potentially, there needs to be subsidies or rewards or even just recognition for the ISPs that do a good job publicly. And generally, all our partners felt that increasing the visibility around IoT regulation to secure a better IoT ecosystem would be good. And finally, it should really be about empowering those that can make the difference in the ecosystem and encourage them to do so. With that, thank you very much, and Tristan and I are happy to have your questions.
Okay.